Hey guys, it's Matt. Welcome to this brand new episode of Courage and Clarity, a conversation with leaders about how to get the most out of all that you have been given. We're going to talk about preaching again today. We've been talking about this over the last several episodes, talking about the three systems that you need to have in place if you want to preach better sermons. And so we've talked about a planning system. We are going to talk about a delivery system in the next episode. Today we're going to talk about how you develop a consistent sermon preparation system. And the power of systems is the fact that what you're able to do with a system is it allows you to clarify and focus on the aspects of preaching that you need if you're going to continue to grow. None of us have finished developing. We have not yet arrived as the best version of ourselves as preachers. And so what we want to do are to find the places that we can consistently work on and develop and continue to improve so we can take advantage and be really good stewards of the opportunity that God's given us to preach the scriptures and the good news of the gospel. So let me walk you through the four elements that you need to have in a sermon preparation schedule. And so let me give them to you and then we'll kind of dive into them for a minute. You need to have in your sermon preparation schedule, you need to have just that. You need to have a consistent sermon preparation schedule. If you're going to have this system for preparing a sermon, you need to have a schedule for when you're going to actually work on and prepare your sermon. Second, you need to have a consistent way to organize your message. Third, you need to have a way to be able to communicate the main idea of your message in a way that's memorable so that people don't forget what you just said and the big idea of your sermon before they even walk out the door. So there are ways that you can do that to help people remember really the main idea that you're trying to communicate in your message, and they can remember that throughout the week. And then the fourth element of a consistent sermon preparation system is going to be the way that you preach for a response. So let's kind of dive into those backwards. Let's talk about preaching for a response first. The idea is pretty simple, that God has a message that he's communicating to his people through your preaching, and his expectation is that we're going to listen to him and respond. That's basic. That's the basic elements of preaching. God speaks and we respond. We listen and then we do what he calls us to do. And so one of the ways to think through this that's been very, very helpful for me was an interview that I did with Pastor Joby Martin of Church of 1122 in Jacksonville, Florida. And he said that when he calls people to respond, he has kind of three lanes that he's working out of from the text. Is the text calling us to respond with our head, our heart, or our hands? So is God calling us to change our thinking, our affections, or our behavior? And so that's a real helpful way to think about it. But consistently, we should be calling people to respond. And so I think when we do that and we shape that conversation, then we should be helping people understand this is what God's saying. If you're listening well, this is how you should respond. Now, in terms of making your main point memorable, so not just preaching for a response, but making the main point of your sermon memorable, I think there are some ways that you can not only be clear, but also be compelling. And so you can use word pictures. You can use different tools like rhyming and alliteration. There's a reason why when we talk about 3 points in a poem, the reason why that resonates with us is because we've seen a lot of people do it. And the reason why a lot of people use that as a tool in preaching is because it's effective. And so it doesn't mean that you should do that. It doesn't mean that that works for your context. But we should be able to press through just being clear, but also want to do everything we can to be compelling because we want to be able to grab people's attention and hold it long enough for them to listen well. And so there's something powerful about being able to do some work beyond just being clear to being creative and compelling so that your people can walk away from your message and have something that they can just kind of marinate on over the course of a week. And if that's the main idea of your sermon and not just necessarily an illustration or something that was a little bit of a side road that you took, but if they're really dwelling on the big idea in that text and the big idea in your sermon, then that's a win. So really work in your preparation to make your messages memorable. One of the ways that you can do that, one of the reasons you can carve out time to really focus on making your message memorable is that you have a consistent kind of sermon organization, that you have a template basically that you're working off of that allows you to consistently say the same kinds of things in the same places with a little bit of a rhythm to it. And you could be around certain preachers, and you've heard that again. 3 points in a poem is kind of a consistent structure to a sermon. And you can have probably your different, your favorite preachers. You listen to them over time, and you could probably pick up on the way in which they consistently organize their message messages. The benefit for you as a preacher, if you're consistent, is that it saves you a lot of time and energy and burning some calories that you might use because you're having to reinvent the wheel every week about, okay, so I've got this biblical text now, how am I going to kind of frame that? The benefit for your church is this, that you have the opportunity to help people listen along with you because they know the general turns that you're going to make, the movements and elements that are going to be there in your sermon, and so they're not lost and confused because they don't know where you're going. And so I think there are some pretty simple ways to really kind of think through how you organize your messages. So for me, I know there's going to be an introduction and a conclusion. My introduction, I want to grab people's attention and pique their curiosity for the rest of the message. At the very end, for me, I want to basically, after I've gone to the text, second, and then applied the text, third, so after my introduction, drive to the text, and then helping people apply it. When I apply it to the nth degree, there's no way that anybody's going to be able to obey God to the depths in which He calls us to obey. So I need to take them to Jesus. That's the way I'm going to conclude it. So my template, my rhythm, and if this is helpful for you, great, is I want to basically make a connection. I want to grab their attention. I want to drive to the text. This is where I do most of my explanation and illustration of whatever text that we're in. I want to show them how it matters. I want to apply it well. I want to apply it to the nth degree. And then I want to take them to Jesus and show them how Jesus did obey, how He did fulfill God's commands here, and also how His work in His life and His death basically fulfilled our need to be forgiven of our sins. And so I want to show them that in every single sermon. And so your template might be different. That's one that you might be able to use. But when you use a template, it allows you to not only be consistent, but also to be creative because you're basically working within a familiar framework. And so do we need to pay attention to things like, does this really fit the genre? Does this fit just kind of the general overall vibe? Should my preaching in Romans feel like Psalms? Yeah, I mean, I think, and there may be times in which you kind of go off the beaten path a little bit and be a little bit more creative. But if you're doing the same thing all the time, then maybe you are pressing a little bit into creativity if your sermons sound the same every single time. But for a lot of us, what I'm running into are preachers that like nothing sounds consistent. They're just all over the place and maybe trying a little bit too much. And so that really jams them up because they're just taking up too much time and energy to make that happen. Now, one more thing here in terms of a consistent sermon preparation system is to schedule your preparation. And so one of the reasons why you might struggle because you're scrambling all the time to get ready on Sunday morning, maybe not every week, but consistently, you're having a hard time getting ready early, is because you haven't identified the blocks that you need in your sermon preparation, and you haven't taken those blocks, put them into your calendar, and protected it. And so if you'll do those two simple things, figure out what are the things that happen when you're preparing a sermon. For me, it goes something like this. I want to read the text probably 15 to 20 times before I do anything with it. I want to be able to do all of my research, my original language stuff, commentaries, any other kind of resources that I want to look at. Then I want to clarify the main idea of both the text and the sermon. Then I want to write my first draft, and then I want to write my final draft. And so I have 5 basic movements in my sermon preparation schedule, and I like to finish on about Wednesday. So when I'm doing that, that allows me to be done early. It allows me to kind of marinate on the sermon for a few days before I preach it. But what makes it really count and what makes it happen consistently is I know what I need to do, and I put it on my schedule, and I protect it. And so just those 3 things. You might not have the same movements that I do, but if you identify kind of the building blocks of your sermon preparation, if you schedule those on your calendar, and if you protect your time, then you're going to consistently find that you're finishing when you want to finish. So if you want to finish by Wednesday, great, you could do that. If you want to do all of your work on Saturday, you could do that too. But just those simple things of clarifying the blocks of time that you need, getting those on your calendar, protecting them, you're going to win. So those are the 4 elements of a sermon preparation system. You schedule your time in preparation. You have a consistent way that you organize your message. You make your message memorable, and you preach consistently for a response to the good news of the gospel. And you're going to find yourself doing a really good job of consistently being ready to say exactly what you need to say. And so next week in the next episode, we'll talk about how do you develop a consistent sermon delivery system? How do you find your voice so that you're not having to sound like somebody else? but you can actually be the preacher that God made you to be. And so we'll come back and talk about that. But again, so in terms of courage and clarity, kind of the step of courage here is to go ahead and make the determination and decision that you're going to develop a sermon preparation system. And then to help you with clarity, then again, below this video, you can grab our free resource, the 3 systems for building, for preaching better sermons. And in that checklist, you'll basically have a way to evaluate your current practice and have some really clear next steps in order to grow in that. So we'd love for you to grab that resource. Again, if you have any questions or comments, leave that below this video. Always love it when you like and share this content, because we want to help as many leaders as possible make the most out of all that God's given them. So thank you for your time today. Look forward to seeing you in the next episode. God bless you. See you soon.